The alarm cuts through the ship before I even feel the shake under my boots. I am under the floor grate of Engine Bay 3, both hands deep inside a coolant line that has been leaking for 2 days, when the whole hull groans like something huge just grabbed it. Red light floods the room. My tools clatter against the metal deck. Somewhere above me, Captain Bowman is shouting over the comm, and his voice has that flat, controlled tone that only shows up when things are truly bad. All hands, brace. We have been boarded. I repeat, we have been boarded. I pull myself out from under the grate and grab the handrail as the ship shudders again, this time from something docking against our hull instead of hitting it. That is worse. A hit means someone is shooting at us and missing. A docking clamp means someone got what they wanted, which is us. I am not a soldier. I am not even close to one. My name is Daniel Hale, and 3 months ago the most dangerous thing in my life was a coffee machine that sparked when you pressed the wrong button. Now I work engine maintenance on a cargo hauler called the Kestrel, hauling scrap metal and old parts between outposts nobody important cares about. It is not glamorous work, but it pays, and out here on the edge of Dominion space, that is enough. Footsteps hit the corridor outside Engine Bay 3. Not our footsteps. These are heavier, more spaced out, moving with a kind of confidence that human boots never quite manage. I press myself against the wall beside the door, more out of instinct than any real plan, and watch the hatch hiss open. The first thing I notice is the height. Whoever is standing in that doorway has to duck to clear the frame, and even then her shoulders nearly brush both sides. The second thing I notice is that she is not wearing a helmet, which either means she is supremely confident or she simply does not think anyone on this ship is worth the trouble of covering her face. She has skin the color of deep blue water under moonlight, smooth in some places and ridged like fine armor in others, especially along her jaw and the backs of her hands. Her eyes are a pale gold, sharp and unblinking, set in a face that is unmistakably feminine and unmistakably not human. Silver markings trail down from her temples like frozen tears, and behind her stand 2 more figures in full battle gear, weapons raised but not yet aimed at anyone specific. I know that face. Not personally, of course, but I have seen it on cargo manifests and warning broadcasts pinned up in every dock office between here and the Outer Rim. Solari Dominion Enforcement. Her kind do not usually show up for routine cargo checks. Her kind show up when someone owes something, and that someone is about to lose it. She steps into the room like she already owns it, which, legally speaking, she might be about to. "Where is the rest of your crew?" she says. It is not really a question. Her voice carries an edge that makes the light fixtures above us seem to hum a little softer, like even the ship itself wants to get out of her way. I should probably answer that. I should probably say something useful, something that helps the captain, something that does not get me shot. Instead, my brain, running on 2 hours of sleep and half a mug of cold coffee, decides that now is the perfect time to notice the string of gold clasps woven into the collar of her uniform, each one shaped like a small crescent moon. She notices me noticing. Her golden eyes narrow, just slightly, and the 2 soldiers behind her shift their weight, ready for a signal that has not come yet. "You," she says, pointing one long finger directly at my chest. "Do you know who I am?" I have heard this question before, mostly in old films where it is followed by someone getting thrown across a room. I have never actually had to answer it out loud, to a real person, while standing in a coolant-stained jumpsuit with grease under my fingernails. My mouth moves before the smarter part of my brain can stop it. "The galaxy's most stunning alien woman," I say. The room goes completely silent. Even the alarm seems to pause for a breath. One of the soldiers behind her actually turns his head, just a fraction, to look at his commander, as if checking whether he heard that correctly. The other one does not move at all, frozen in the kind of stillness that suggests he has genuinely never seen anyone respond to his commander this way, and has no idea what the correct next move is supposed to be. She blinks. Just once, but it is enough. For a creature who probably walks into rooms and watches grown men drop their weapons out of pure fear, An unexpected compliment seems to be a completely foreign weapon, one she has no training against. "That is not," she says slowly, like she is choosing each word very carefully, "an appropriate response." "Sorry," I say, and I actually mean it, because getting shot on a Tuesday was not on my schedule. It is still true, though. Her jaw tightens. The silver markings along her temple seem to shimmer, brighter now, which I later learn is something that happens when Solari feel a strong emotion they are not used to showing. Right now, I genuinely cannot tell if that emotion is fury or something else entirely. "I am Vexthara," she says, and there is a weight behind the name, like it is supposed to mean something, like I am supposed to flinch. "Enforcement Commander of the Dominion's 6th Fleet. Your captain has failed to answer 3 formal notices regarding an outstanding debt owed to my government. I am here to collect what is owed, in full, including this vessel, and everyone currently standing on it." That last part lands heavier than anything else she has said. Behind her, more footsteps echo down the corridor, boots on metal, more soldiers moving to secure the rest of the ship. Somewhere above us, I hear Captain Bowman's voice again, sharper now, trying to negotiate with someone who clearly is not interested in negotiating. I glance past Vexthara, just for a second, and see 2 more figures pass the open hatch, herding Grace and Oliver from the cargo hold toward the main deck, hands raised. My stomach drops. This is not a routine inspection. This is a seizure, and apparently my captain has been sitting on a debt large enough that an actual enforcement commander decided to handle it personally instead of sending a collections drone. "Look," I say, and I keep my hands visible, palms open, the universal signal for I am not currently a threat to anyone. I do not know anything about a debt. I fix engines. That is genuinely the whole extent of my job description. Vexthara studies me for a long moment. Up close, her eyes have flecks of a deeper gold near the center, almost like a second color hiding inside the first, and I realize I am staring again, which is probably not helping my case. "You are the second human in the last hour to look me in the eyes without shaking," she says, and there is something almost curious in her tone now, layered under the authority. "The first one drew a weapon. You made a comment about my appearance." "In my defense," I say, "I think that one went better for me." One of the soldiers behind her makes a sound that might be a laugh, quickly swallowed when Vexthara's head turns sharply toward him. He straightens immediately, staring at a fixed point on the wall like his life depends on it, which, given what I am starting to understand about the Dominion, it might. Vexthara turns back to me, and for a moment the fury I expected does not come. Instead, there is something more careful in her expression, like she is recalculating something, adjusting a plan that was supposed to be simple and is now, somehow, not. "You will come with me," she says. "Along with your captain. The rest of your crew will remain here under guard while my officers inventory the cargo." And if I say no, I ask, mostly because I want to know how much room I actually have to work with, which, judging by the weapons still raised in the doorway, is probably none. "Then I will assume you value your ship less than your pride," she says, "and I will take both anyway." Fair point. I push off the wall and step forward, hands still raised, and she watches me the entire way, gold eyes tracking every movement like she is still trying to decide whether I am dangerous, foolish, or some combination of both that she has not encountered before. As I pass her in the doorway, close enough now to see the fine detail in the ridges along her jaw, she speaks again, quieter this time, meant only for me. "That was a foolish thing to say to me, human." "Probably," I agree, but it was still true. She does not answer that. She simply turns and walks ahead of me down the corridor, silver markings still faintly glowing along her temples, and I follow her toward whatever is about to happen to my ship, my crew, and apparently my future, wondering the entire time whether I have just made the biggest mistake of my life, or, somehow, the smartest one. Behind me, through the open hatch of Engine Bay 3, the coolant line I never finished repairing lets out one last long hiss of escaping gas, like even the ship is holding its breath, waiting to see which one it turns out to be. I do not get an answer right away. What I get instead is a long walk down a corridor that suddenly feels much colder than it did 5 minutes ago, flanked by 2 soldiers who have not lowered their weapons since the hatch first opened, toward a woman who just found out that humans do not always behave the way her briefings promised, and does not yet know what to do about it. Neither, honestly, do I. They put me in a room 3 decks up from Engine Bay 3, a room that used to be our small conference space back when the Kestrel still bothered pretending it was a professional operation. Now there is a Solari soldier standing at the door, and Vexthera sitting across from me at the table, arms folded, studying me like I am a puzzle with a missing piece she cannot find. Captain Bowman sits beside me, sweating through his collar, doing his best to explain a debt that apparently goes back 2 owners before he ever bought this ship. Vexthera listens without interrupting, which somehow feels more threatening than if she had shouted the whole time. "The debt," she says finally, cutting off the captain mid-sentence, "is not why I am still in this room." Bowman blinks. "Then why are you still in this room?" She does not answer him. Her gold eyes shift toward me instead, and I feel that same prickle of attention I felt back in Engine Bay 3, like being looked at by something that has spent its whole life being looked away from. "Leave us," she says, and for a second I think she means me. Then the soldier at the door snaps to attention and steps out into the corridor, and Captain Bowman, looking somewhere between relieved and terrified, follows him without needing to be asked twice. The hatch seals behind them with a soft click, and suddenly it is just the 2 of us and the low hum of the ship's recycled air. "You should be afraid of me," she says. It is not a threat, not exactly. It sounds almost like she is reading a line from a script she has used 1,000 times and is only now noticing how strange it sounds out loud. "I am a little afraid of you," I admit. "Mostly because you have a small army with you and I have a wrench." "That is not what I mean." She leans forward slightly, elbows on the table, and the silver markings along her temples catch the light. "My name carries weight across 6 systems. I have ended uprisings without firing a single shot, simply by arriving. Soldiers surrender, governors resign, and you, a maintenance worker on a ship carrying scrap metal, looked me in the eyes and told me I was beautiful." "Stunning," I correct her, before I can stop myself. I said stunning. Her jaw tightens again, but this time there is something else underneath it, something that might almost be amusement if she would let herself show it. "You understand that I could have you removed from this ship entirely, permanently." "I understand that," I say, and I mean it, because the fear is very real, sitting somewhere in the back of my throat, where it has been sitting since the alarm first went off. I just do not think being scared of you would have changed anything about what happens next. So I figured I might as well say something true instead of something safe. She goes quiet for a moment, and in that silence I finally get a proper look at her, not as a threat standing in a doorway, but as a person sitting across a table, which is a very different thing. There is exhaustion behind those gold eyes, the kind that does not come from one bad day, but from a long, long line of them, stacked one on top of another. "You are new to the Dominion," she says eventually. "Your species. Barely accepted as provisional members, and only after the Ash Wars forced my government to admit that ignoring you entirely was more dangerous than dealing with you directly." "I have heard the name," I say. "Never really understood what it meant. Nobody talks about it much where I grew up." "It means your people fought like nothing my government had encountered before," she says, and there is something almost respectful in the way she says it, buried under the formality. "Not because you were stronger. You were not. Not because you had better ships or better weapons. You did not. You fought because you simply refused to stop, long after every calculation said you should have. My commanders studied it for years afterward, trying to understand the pattern. They never fully did." "That does explain a few things," I say. "About why nobody on this ship seemed particularly rattled when you boarded us, I mean. We were more worried about the cargo insurance than getting hurt." "That is precisely the problem," she says, and for the first time there is real frustration in her voice. not directed at me exactly, more at the situation itself. My reputation exists because every other species in this quadrant understands what it means when I say my name. They know what I have done. They know what I am capable of doing again. And you looked at me like I was simply a person standing in a doorway. You are a person standing in a doorway, I say. A very tall, very intimidating person, with a small army and a debt collection notice, but still a person. She stares at me for a long moment, long enough that I start to wonder if I have finally said the thing that gets me thrown out an airlock. Then, unexpectedly, something shifts in her expression, something that looks almost like relief, quickly hidden away again behind that same careful, controlled mask she has worn since she first stepped through the hatch. Do you know how long it has been since someone spoke to me without either groveling or reaching for a weapon? She says quietly. It is not really a question either, not the kind that wants an answer. It is the kind that just needs to be said out loud, to someone, finally. I am guessing a while, I say. Longer than you would believe. She sits back in her chair, and for a moment, the commander disappears entirely, replaced by someone who just looks tired, the way anyone looks tired after carrying something heavy for too long without ever being allowed to put it down. Titles do strange things to how people treat you. My own officers barely speak to me unless it is required. My equals in rank see me only as competition, and everyone beneath me sees me only as a threat to be avoided. Sounds lonely, I say, and I do not mean it as a strategy or a way to soften her up. It just genuinely sounds that way, the kind of lonely that comes from being surrounded by people who never actually see you, only the shape of what you represent. Something flickers across her face, quick and unguarded, gone before I can fully read it. It is not a topic I discuss. Fair enough, I say. I will stop asking about it. I did not say to stop, she says, and there is the faintest edge of surprise in her own voice, like she did not expect herself to say that either. The soldier at the door knocks twice, sharp and formal, and calls something through the hatch in the clipped, efficient language the Dominion uses for official business. Vexthara answers without looking away from me, her voice shifting back into the commanding tone she used when she first stepped into Engine Bay 3. All business again, the tired woman from a moment ago tucked carefully back out of sight. We will finish the inventory of the cargo hold within the hour, she says, standing, and the chair scrapes softly against the deck plating. Your captain's debt remains unresolved. Legally, this vessel and its crew belong to the Dominion until it is paid in full, which, given the state of your finances, will likely be never. My stomach drops again, the same way it did when I first heard the word seizure. So what happens to us? That, she says, moving toward the hatch, is what I am currently trying to decide. She pauses at the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, and looks back at me over her shoulder. The silver markings along her temple catch the corridor light, and for just a second, the mask slips again, just enough for me to see something underneath it that looks almost like curiosity, or maybe hope, though I am not entirely sure a Dominion enforcement commander is supposed to be capable of either. You are either the bravest human I have ever encountered, she says, or the most foolish. I have not yet decided which. Can it be both? I ask. The corner of her mouth twitches, just slightly, the closest thing to a smile I have seen from her since she boarded this ship. Perhaps, she says, and then she is gone, the hatch sealing behind her, leaving me alone in a room that suddenly feels very quiet. I sit there for a long moment, listening to my own heartbeat slow back down to something reasonable, replaying the last hour in my head like it belongs to someone else, some other person who somehow talked their way through a boarding party without getting hurt. Outside, somewhere down the corridor, I can hear Vexthara's voice again, sharp and commanding, giving orders to her officers about the cargo inventory, back to being exactly the person her reputation promises. But I keep thinking about that other version of her, the one that sat across the table from me for 10 minutes and admitted, in her own careful way, that she is tired of being feared instead of known. I do not know yet what that means for the Kestrel, or for my crew, or for whatever debt my captain apparently forgot to mention when he hired me 3 months ago. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever happens next, this is not going to be a simple cargo seizure anymore. Not after that conversation. Not after the way she looked at me in that doorway, like she was seeing something she had not expected to find, and was not entirely sure what to do with it now that she had. The hatch stays sealed for a long while after she leaves, long enough that I start to wonder if I am supposed to wait here, or if this counts as some kind of unofficial prison cell now that the Kestrel technically belongs to a government I have never even visited. Eventually the soldier outside opens it again, gestures for me to follow, and leads me back toward the cargo hold, where the rest of my crew is waiting, and where, I am about to learn, the real negotiation has not even started yet. The cargo hold is louder than I expect. Solari officers move between stacked crates with handheld scanners, calling out numbers to each other in their clipped language, while Grace and Oliver sit on an overturned crate near the far wall, guarded by a soldier who looks bored more than threatening. Priya is pacing, arms crossed tight, and Ben is sitting very still, watching everything with the kind of focus he usually saves for engine diagnostics, not hostile boarding parties. Grace spots me first. "There he is," she says, standing up fast enough that the soldier near her tenses. "Daniel, what happened up there? We heard you got taken to talk to the commander alone." "I did," I say, and I am not entirely sure how to summarize the last 20 minutes without sounding like I have completely lost my mind. It was strange. She is strange. Not in a bad way necessarily, just not what I expected. "She is here to take the whole ship," Oliver says flatly. I do not think strange is the word I would use. Before I can answer, the hatch at the far end of the hold opens, and Vexthera walks in, flanked by 2 officers carrying data slates covered in scrolling cargo figures. The entire room shifts the moment she enters, conversation dropping to near silence, even the board guard near Grace straightening up fast. Captain Bowman appears a moment later, pushed gently forward by another soldier, looking paler than I have ever seen him. "The inventory is complete," Vexthera says, and her voice carries easily across the whole hold without her needing to raise it. "Your cargo of salvaged parts and scrap alloy is worth approximately 1/10 of the outstanding debt owed to the Dominion. Even accounting for the value of this vessel itself, the total still falls significantly short." Captain Bowman opens his mouth, closes it again, opens it once more. There has to be some kind of arrangement, some kind of payment plan. I can start sending installments, I just need time to— "The previous owner of this ship was given 4 years of installments," Vexthera says, cutting him off without any real cruelty in her tone, just cold fact. The debt only grew. Dominion law is clear on this matter. When a debt of this size goes unresolved past the final notice, the vessel and its registered crew become property of the Dominion, to be reassigned as labor until the debt is considered repaid through service. The word labor lands hard in the room. Priya stops pacing. Grace's hand finds Oliver's arm without either of them seeming to notice they have grabbed onto each other. Even Ben, usually the calmest person on this crew, goes very still in a way that looks less like focus now and more like fear held carefully in place. I feel something twist in my chest, and before I can think better of it, I am stepping forward, past Captain Bowman, closer to Vexthera than any of the soldiers around her seem entirely comfortable with. "That is not fair," I say. She turns to look at me, and there is something in her expression that is not quite surprise, but close to it, like she expected this from me specifically, more than from anyone else in the room. "Fairness," she says, "is not a legal category, human." "Maybe it should be," I say. "You are talking about permanently taking away 5 people's freedom because someone who owned this ship before any of us ever set foot on it made bad decisions. None of us signed up for that. None of us even knew about it until an hour ago. The debt is attached to the vessel and its crew registry, not to individual intent," she says, and I can hear the formal training in her voice now, the words she has probably said 100 times before to 100 other desperate crews. That has always been the law. Then the law is broken, I say, and I hear Captain Bowman make a small strangled sound behind me, like he cannot decide whether to be grateful I am arguing or terrified I am about to get us all shot. You told me back in that room that people either grovel to you or reach for a weapon. I am doing neither. I am telling you, as one person to another, that what you are describing sounds like slavery with better paperwork. The hold goes completely silent. One of the officers near Vexthera shifts his weight, hand drifting slightly toward his weapon, but she raises one hand, barely more than an inch, and he freezes instantly, retreating back into stillness. Vexthera studies me for a long moment, gold eyes unreadable, and I genuinely cannot tell if I have just made things dramatically worse or accidentally said something she has been waiting a long time for someone to say to her directly. "You have no idea," she says finally, quiet enough that only those of us close by can hear it, "how many times I have thought the same thing, standing in rooms exactly like this one, watching families torn apart over numbers on a data slate. And you have no idea how little power I actually have to change laws written by people far above my rank, in cities I have never even visited. Then use whatever power you do have," I say. "There has to be something." For a long moment, she does not answer. She simply looks at me, and then past me, at the rest of my crew standing frightened near the cargo crates, and then at Captain Bowman, who has gone very quiet, clearly hoping that whatever is happening right now does not require him to say anything else. "There is one option," she says finally, and her tone shifts into something more formal, more careful, like she is choosing this path very deliberately and wants everyone in the room to understand the weight of it. Dominion law permits what is called trial by service. Rather than immediate seizure, a debtor crew may be granted a formal trial period, during which they serve directly under the authority of the enforcing officer. If, at the end of that period, the officer determines the debtor has demonstrated sufficient value, the debt may be reduced, restructured, or in rare cases, forgiven entirely. "And if we do not demonstrate enough value," Oliver asks from across the hold, voice tight. "Then the original seizure proceeds. Delayed but not avoided," Vexthera says honestly, not softening it at all. "I will not pretend this offers a guarantee. It offers a chance. That is all." Captain Bowman finally finds his voice again. "How long is this trial period?" Standard Dominion protocol allows for a duration determined by the enforcing officer, based on the complexity of the case, Vexthera says, and her eyes flick briefly toward me before returning to the captain. "Given the size of this debt, I would set the period at 2 full cycles. Approximately 16 days, by your ship's calendar. 16 days does not sound like much time to prove that an entire crew deserves to keep their freedom, but it sounds considerably better than the alternative currently being scanned into a data slate by the officer standing 3 feet away from me. "What would this trial actually involve?" Priya asks, stepping forward for the first time since Vexthera entered the hold. "What exactly would we be doing?" "You would serve aboard my vessel, alongside my crew, performing whatever tasks are required," Vexthera says. "Maintenance, logistics, in some cases, direct support during operations. You would be under my direct command for the duration." "And the Kestrel?" Captain Bowman asks. "What happens to my ship while we are gone?" "It will remain docked and under Dominion seal until the trial concludes," she says. "Untouched, provided the seal is not tampered with." I glance around at my crew, at the mixture of fear and cautious hope on their faces, and I can tell they are all doing the same math I am doing. 16 days serving under an alien commander, with no guarantee of success, against permanent loss of everything. It is not really a choice at all, not when you look at it honestly. "We accept," I say, before Captain Bowman can even finish weighing his options out loud. Vexthera's eyes shift to me again, and this time there is something in her expression that looks almost like approval, quickly hidden behind formality once more. "That is not your decision to make, human. Your captain speaks for this crew." He does, I agree, glancing sideways at Bowman, who is still staring at Vexthera like he cannot quite believe any of this is actually happening. But I am guessing he agrees with me. Bowman lets out a long breath, the kind that comes from a man who has been holding it for far too long, and nods slowly. We accept the trial, all of us. Very well, Vexthera says, and there is something almost like relief in the way her shoulders shift, just slightly, before the formal posture reasserts itself. Gather only what you need. You will board my vessel within the hour. The kestrel will be sealed and monitored until the trial concludes. The officers begin moving again, resuming the process of securing the cargo hold, and the tension in the room slowly starts to loosen, replaced by the quiet, uncertain energy of people who have just avoided one disaster only to walk directly into the uncertainty of another. Grace lets go of Oliver's arm, finally, and wipes her palms against her jumpsuit like she is trying to physically shake off the last few minutes. Priya is already talking quietly with Ben about what kind of tasks they might realistically be assigned, planning ahead the way she always does when she is nervous. Vexthera turns to leave, then pauses, looking back at me one more time. The rest of the crew is distracted now, gathering their few belongings, and for a moment, it feels like the conversation happening between us is entirely separate from everything else going on in the hold. You took a considerable risk back there, she says quietly, speaking to me the way you did, in front of my officers. I noticed you did not have me removed, I say. No, she agrees, I did not. She studies me for another moment, gold eyes tracing something in my expression I am not entirely sure I am showing on purpose. I am curious to see whether the confidence I have witnessed from you today extends beyond conversation. 16 days is a long time to maintain an act, if that is what this is. It is not an act, I say. We will see, she says, and there is the faintest trace of something almost warm in her voice now, buried carefully under the formal tone she seems determined to keep in front of her officers. I look forward to finding out, Daniel Hale. I blink, surprised she remembers my name, since I do not recall giving it to her directly, though I suppose Captain Bowman must have used it at some point during the earlier negotiations. She turns and walks toward the hatch before I can say anything else, silver markings catching the overhead light one last time before she disappears into the corridor beyond. Later that night, after the crew has gathered our things and boarded a Dominion shuttle bound for Vexthara's vessel, I catch a fragment of conversation through a half-open door as we wait to be assigned quarters. Vexthara is standing with one of her senior officers, the tall one who first questioned my compliment back in Engine Bay 3, and though I am not meant to hear it, the corridor carries sound farther than either of them probably realizes. You have never granted trial by service before, the officer says, and there is genuine confusion in his voice, like he is trying to understand a decision that does not fit the commander he has known for years. Not once, in all the seizures I have witnessed under your command. There is a long pause before Vexthara answers, and when she does, her voice is quieter than I have heard it yet, almost private, meant only for the officer standing beside her. No, she admits, I have not. Then why now, he asks. Why this crew? Another pause, longer this time. I hold my breath without meaning to, standing frozen in the corridor, with my duffel bag over one shoulder, waiting for an answer I am not entirely sure I am supposed to hear. Because for the first time in longer than I care to admit, she says finally, someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a title. I find that I am not yet ready to let that go. The officer says nothing in response, and after a moment, footsteps move away from the door, and the corridor falls quiet again except for the low hum of the ship around me. I stand there a moment longer, turning her words over in my head, before Grace calls my name from further down the hall, and I have to move, have to keep walking toward whatever the next 16 days are going to look like. But her words stay with me the whole way, echoing quietly under everything else, like the first real crack in a wall that has clearly been standing for a very long time. By the 5th day aboard Vexthara's vessel, the Dominion crew has stopped staring at us every time we walk down a corridor. That, more than anything, feels like progress. The ship itself is called the Ashen Wing, and it is nothing like the Kestrel, where our old freighter creaks and groans and smells faintly of engine grease no matter how much anyone scrubs it. The Ashen Wing hums with a kind of quiet efficiency, every surface polished, every system running exactly as designed. It makes me nervous in a way I cannot quite explain, like the whole ship is holding itself to a standard none of us were ever taught to meet. I have spent most of my time in the engineering section, working alongside a Solari technician named Threll, who initially refused to let me touch anything more complicated than a diagnostic panel. By day 3, after I fixed a pressure regulator that had apparently been malfunctioning for weeks without anyone identifying the cause, Threll started asking my opinion on things instead of simply tolerating my presence. "You do not work like our engineers," Threll says one afternoon, watching me route a bypass cable around a damaged relay instead of waiting for a replacement part to arrive from supply. "We are taught to follow procedure exactly. You are taught to improvise." "We are taught both," I say. "We just run out of patience for the first one a lot faster than you do." Threll makes a low sound that I have learned means something close to amusement, and goes back to monitoring the readout beside me. It is strange how quickly some things start to feel almost normal, working shoulder to shoulder with someone whose entire species terrified me less than a week ago. Grace has been assigned to logistics, cataloging supplies with a precision that has apparently impressed the quartermaster enough that he requested she stay on past the trial period, an offer she politely declined while explaining that she already has a ship she would like to go home to. Oliver and Priya have been rotating through general maintenance, and Ben, to almost everyone's surprise, has found something close to friendship with a young Solari communications officer who shares his obsession with old data encryption puzzles. Vexthara, for her part, has kept a careful distance since we boarded, present at briefings and inspections, formal and composed in front of her crew, but never quite finding a reason to speak with me directly the way she did back on the Kestrel. I tell myself that is probably for the best. I tell myself that several times a day, actually, which should probably tell me something. It is on the 7th day that everything changes. The alarm comes without warning, a deep, resonant tone that rolls through the entire ship, followed immediately by Vexthara's voice, over the intercom, sharp and urgent in a way I have not heard from her before. "All hands to combat stations. Unidentified vessels approaching. Hostile formation. This is not a drill." I am in engineering with Threll when it hits, and within seconds the calm efficiency of the Ashen Wing shatters into controlled chaos, officers moving fast between stations, lights shifting from steady white to pulsing amber. Threll grabs my arm before I can ask what is happening. "Raiders," he says grimly. "Independent pirate fleet, operating out of the debris fields near the outer supply routes. They have been targeting Dominion vessels for months, striking fast and disappearing before reinforcements arrive." "What do you need me to do?" I ask, and the question surprises even me. How quickly it comes out, how little hesitation is behind it. Threll looks at me for a moment, clearly weighing something, then gestures toward the main power relay station at the far end of engineering. "If we take damage, the containment systems on the reactor core will need manual stabilization faster than the automated protocols can manage. I need someone who can move fast and think faster. You have already proven you can do both." The first impact hits before I even reach the relay station, a hard shudder that throws me against the bulkhead hard enough to leave a bruise I will feel for days afterward. Emergency lighting flickers, alarms shift pitch, and somewhere above us I can hear Vexthara's voice again over the comm, calm despite the chaos, directing her officers through what sounds like a coordinated defensive pattern. Multiple hostile vessels closing on our port side. All available fighters, launch immediately. Engineering, I need full power to forward shields, now. Threll is already moving, hands flying across the control panel, redirecting power through systems I only half understand. I position myself at the relay station exactly as instructed, watching readouts climb toward dangerous thresholds as the ship absorbs hit after hit from outside. Containment field destabilizing, I call out, watching numbers spike on the display in front of me. Threll, I need a manual override sequence, now. He shouts instructions across the noise, and I follow them as fast as my hands can move, rerouting the containment field manually, buying precious seconds while the automated systems struggle to catch up. It is not that different, really, from the coolant repair I was doing back in Engine Bay 3, the day this all started, except now the stakes are considerably higher, and there is no time to be nervous about it. The ship shudders again, harder this time, and somewhere down the corridor I hear a crash, followed by Oliver's voice shouting for help. Without thinking, I abandon the relay station, trusting Threll to handle the containment field alone, and sprint toward the sound. I find Oliver pinned beneath a fallen support strut in the maintenance corridor outside cargo storage, face pale, one leg trapped at an angle that makes my stomach turn just looking at it. Priya is already there, straining uselessly against the weight of the strut, unable to shift it on her own. "Help me," she gasps as I arrive, and together we throw our combined weight against the strut, metal grinding against metal, until finally, with a groan that sounds almost like relief, it shifts just enough for Oliver to pull himself free. That is when Vexthera appears at the end of the corridor, moving fast, despite the chaos around her, and for a moment, I forget entirely about the battle happening outside the hull, struck by how different she looks in motion like this. Every ounce of formal composure replaced by something more immediate, more real. "Status," she demands, kneeling beside Oliver, checking his leg with quick, efficient hands. "Fractured, I think," Priya says. "He needs medical attention." Vexthera does not hesitate. She lifts Oliver herself, careful but fast, and starts moving toward the medical bay, calling instructions over her shoulder to Priya and me as she goes. "Both of you, back to your stations. We are not finished yet." I run back toward engineering, heart pounding, and find Threll still fighting to stabilize the containment field alone, sweat visible along his brow despite whatever equivalent of composure his species is supposed to maintain under pressure. "Field is holding, barely," he says as I rejoin him at the relay station. "3 more hits like the last one and we lose containment entirely. Then we make sure there are not 3 more hits," I say, though I have absolutely no idea how I am supposed to guarantee that from an engineering station 3 decks below the actual fighting. As if in answer, the ship shudders one final time, but softer now, followed almost immediately by Vexthera's voice over the comm, still sharp, but carrying an entirely different tone now, something closer to relief. "Hostile formation retreating. All fighters, hold position and confirm clear space before returning to dock. Well fought, everyone." The tension in engineering breaks all at once, officers slumping slightly at their stations, a few quiet exchanges of relief passing between crew members, who moments ago were entirely focused on survival. Threll lets out a long breath and turns to me, something like genuine respect visible in his expression for the first time since we met. "You did well," he says simply. "Better than well. Honestly, I have served with Dominion engineers who panicked worse than you did under half this pressure." "I have had practice panicking quietly," I say, and he actually laughs, a short surprise sound that seems to catch even him off guard. It takes almost an hour before the ship fully stands down from combat alert, and by the time I make my way toward the medical bay to check on Oliver, my hands are still shaking slightly from adrenaline that has nowhere left to go. I find him sitting up on a medical bed, leg wrapped and stabilized, looking pale but stubbornly cheerful, Priya sitting beside him with visible relief written across her whole face. "Fractured tibia," Oliver says, gesturing at his leg. Apparently their medical technology is annoyingly good, though. They are saying it will be mostly healed within a few days. "Good," I say, and I mean it more than the simple word probably conveys. That is genuinely good news. Vexthera is standing near the doorway, still in the same posture she had when she carried Oliver in, arms now crossed, watching the scene with an expression I cannot quite place. When she notices me looking, she gestures slightly with her head toward the corridor, a silent invitation to step outside for a moment. I follow her out, and once we are alone, the noise of the medical bay fading behind us, she turns to face me directly, something different in her posture now, something less formal than I have seen from her since the day this all started. "You left your assigned station during active combat," she says, and for a moment I brace myself for a reprimand. To help a crew member you have known for less than a week. "He needed help," I say simply. That seemed more important than following a schedule. "It was reckless," she says. "Probably," I agree. "It was also," she continues, and there is something in her voice now that softens the entire sentence. "Exactly the kind of thing I would expect from you, at this point." I do not entirely know what to say to that, so I say nothing, and we stand there together in the quiet corridor for a long moment, the adrenaline of the last hour slowly settling into something calmer, something that feels less like the aftermath of a battle and more like the beginning of an understanding neither of us has fully put into words yet. "Thank you," she says finally, quieter than I have ever heard her speak, "for your help today. All of you. This crew fought as though it were their own ship under attack, not a vessel belonging to the government that was, only a week ago, prepared to seize everything they owned. Maybe that is worth thinking about," I say gently, "the kind of loyalty you get when people actually want to help you, instead of being forced to." She looks at me for a long moment, gold eyes steady, unreadable in the dim corridor lighting, and for the first time since I met her, I genuinely cannot tell what she is thinking, though something about the silence between us feels less like distance now, and more like the quiet, before someone finally decides to say something they have been holding back for a long time. "Get some rest, Daniel," she says eventually, stepping back, formality settling over her again like a familiar coat. "Tomorrow will bring its own difficulties, regardless of today's outcome." She turns and walks down the corridor, and I watch her go, still feeling the echo of her thank you settle somewhere in my chest, warmer than I probably should let myself admit, considering everything that is still uncertain about where this trial, and whatever is growing between us alongside it, is actually headed. The 16th day arrives faster than I expect, the way endings often do when you have spent most of your time trying not to think about them. Oliver is walking again, still favoring his healed leg slightly but otherwise back to himself, cracking jokes in the mess hall that have started to genuinely land with a few of the Solari officers who once treated him with suspicious silence. Grace has been formally thanked by the quartermaster twice more, and Priya has spent her last few days trading maintenance techniques with Threll, who now refers to her as one of the sharpest minds he has worked with in years, human or otherwise. Even Ben has exchanged contact information with his communications officer friend, promising to keep sending encryption puzzles across the growing distance between Dominion space and wherever the Kestrel ends up heading next. I find all of this both wonderful and strange, because none of it changes the fact that today, in a few hours, Vexthara will decide whether our debt is forgiven, restructured, or whether the original seizure resumes exactly where it left off 16 days ago. I am summoned to the command deck an hour before the formal decision is scheduled to be announced, and I find Vexthara standing alone at the observation window, looking out at the stretch of stars beyond the Ashen Wing's hull, her posture different than I have ever seen it, something almost unguarded in the set of her shoulders. "You asked for me," I say, stepping up beside her, close enough to see her reflection faintly against the glass. "I did." She does not look away from the window right away, and for a long moment we simply stand there together, watching the stars pass slowly outside. "I have made my decision regarding your crew's debt." "And," I ask, my heart suddenly beating faster than I would like to admit. "Patience," she says, and there is the faintest trace of teasing in her voice now, something I never would have imagined from her 16 days ago. "I will announce it formally, to your entire crew, in front of my officers, as protocol requires. But I wanted to speak with you first, privately." She finally turns from the window to face me directly, and something in her expression has shifted from the careful formality she wore during our first conversation in that conference room, replaced now by something more open, more honest. "Do you know who I am?" she asks, and the question lands differently this time than it did back in Engine Bay 316 days ago. There is no threat in it now, no expectation of fear or groveling. It sounds instead like a genuine question, quiet and vulnerable in a way I never would have believed her capable of when we first met. I think carefully before I answer, because I understand now that this question deserves more than the quick, glib response I gave the first time, even if that response happened to be true. "I know that you are Vexthara, Enforcement Commander of the Dominion's 6th Fleet," I say slowly. "I know your reputation stretches across 6 systems, and that soldiers and governors alike have surrendered simply because you arrived. I know you fought in campaigns most people would not survive, and that your name alone has ended conflicts other commanders could not resolve through force." She listens quietly, gold eyes steady on mine, waiting. "But I also know that you sat across a table from me 16 days ago and admitted you were tired of being feared instead of known," I continue. "I know you granted a trial by service you have never granted before, because for once, someone looked at you and saw a person instead of a title. I know you carried an injured crew member to medical care with your own hands during an active battle, and that you thanked a group of strangers for fighting like it was their own home under attack. I know you are exhausted and lonely and far more thoughtful than your reputation ever gives you credit for." Her expression shifts as I speak, something soft and unguarded breaking through the careful composure she has maintained since the moment we met, and when I finally stop talking, she is quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she is searching for something she has been afraid to hope was actually there. "And the galaxy's most stunning alien woman," she says finally, quietly, the corner of her mouth lifting just slightly. "Does that assessment still stand?" "It was never really about the compliment," I say. "Not entirely. I said it because it was true, but also because you deserve to be seen as something other than a threat, even for just a moment. I meant it then. I mean it more now, honestly, because now I actually know you, instead of just admiring you from across a room." She reaches out, hesitant in a way that feels entirely unfamiliar, coming from someone who commands entire fleets without a moment's uncertainty, and rests her hand lightly against my arm, the silver markings along her temple glowing faintly brighter, the way I have learned happens when her emotions run stronger than she is used to allowing. "No one has ever spoken to me the way you do," she says. "Not once, in longer than I can remember. I did not expect, when I boarded that freighter 16 days ago, that seizing a small crew's debt would somehow lead me here." "Where is here, exactly?" I ask, and I am genuinely curious, because I have been asking myself the same question for at least the last week, without finding an answer I trust. "Somewhere I am not entirely certain I know how to navigate," she admits. "I have spent my entire career learning how to command fear and respect through strength alone. I do not know how to command whatever this is." "Maybe it is not something you command," I say gently. "Maybe it is something you just let happen, the same way I let myself say something ridiculous the first moment I saw you, instead of following whatever script I was supposed to follow." She laughs then, soft and genuine, a sound I have never heard from her before, and it changes her entire face, softens something that has probably been held tightly in place for years longer than I can imagine. "You are, without question, the most unpredictable human I have ever encountered." "I will take that as a compliment," I say. "You should," she says. "I do not offer many." The formal announcement, when it finally comes an hour later, gathers the entire crew of the Kestrel into the Ashen Wing's main assembly hall, alongside a full contingent of Dominion officers standing at attention along the walls. Vexthara stands at the front of the room, formal and composed once more, though I notice she glances toward me just once before beginning, something private passing between us that no one else in the room seems to catch. 16 days ago, she begins, her voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd, this crew was offered a trial by service, an alternative to the seizure their outstanding debt legally required. During that time, they They served alongside my own officers with a level of dedication, skill, and loyalty I have rarely witnessed, even among crews with far greater experience serving under Dominion command. Captain Bowman stands near the front, hands clasped tightly in front of him, and I can see the tension radiating off him even from several rows back. I have reviewed their conduct throughout the trial period, Vexthera continues, including their performance during the recent hostile engagement, in which multiple crew members risked their own safety to assist both each other and my officers without hesitation. Based on this review, I am formally declaring the debt owed by the vessel Kestrel to be forgiven in full, effective immediately. The room erupts, quietly at first, then louder, Grace throwing her arms around Oliver, Priya letting out a relieved laugh that echoes off the walls, Captain Bowman visibly sagging with relief, so complete he has to steady himself against the nearest railing. I stay quiet, watching Vexthara instead, and she meets my eyes across the room, something warm and private passing between us even amid the celebration surrounding us both. Additionally, she continues, once the noise settles enough for her voice to carry again, given the strength of the working relationship demonstrated between this crew and my own officers, I am proposing a formal cooperative agreement between the Kestrel and the Dominion's 6th Fleet, granting your vessel preferred contractor status for future salvage and logistics operations within this sector, along with full access to Dominion supply routes and repair facilities. Captain Bowman looks like he might actually faint from relief, and Ben lets out a whoop that draws a surprised laugh from several nearby Solari officers, who seem to be slowly adjusting to the idea that humans express excitement rather loudly. Later that evening, after the formal celebrations have quieted and most of the crew has retreated to their quarters to properly process everything that happened over the last 16 days, I find myself back at the observation window on the command deck, watching the stars once more, when Vexthera joins me, standing close enough this time that our shoulders nearly touch. "You never answered my earlier question properly," she says, looking out at the stars rather than at me, though there is a softness in her voice that suggests the formality is mostly just habit at this point. About whether it can be both, brave and foolish. "I think I have decided it can," I say. "I think most of the best things probably are." She turns to look at me then, gold eyes catching the starlight from the window, and for a long moment neither of us says anything at all, the silence between us comfortable in a way it never quite was during those first tense conversations 16 days ago. "The cooperative agreement," she says eventually, "will require regular coordination between our two crews, meetings, joint operations, a considerable amount of continued contact between the Kestrel and the 6th Fleet. That sounds like it could get complicated," I say, and I am fairly certain I am not managing to hide the smile in my voice. "Extraordinarily complicated," she agrees, and there is definitely a smile in her voice too now, warm and unguarded, in a way that feels like the furthest possible distance from the commander who boarded my ship 16 days ago, demanding to know if I understood exactly who I was dealing with. I find, surprisingly, that I am looking forward to it regardless. "Do you know who I am?" I ask, echoing her own question back to her, curious what she will say. She studies me for a long moment, something thoughtful and warm behind her gold eyes, before she finally answers, her voice quiet, certain, entirely free of the formal weight it carried the very first time this conversation happened between us. "Daniel Hale," she says, "engineer aboard the Kestrel, the first person in longer than I care to admit who looked at me and saw someone worth knowing, rather than someone worth fearing." "Close enough," I say, and she laughs again, that same soft, genuine sound, and together we stand there at the window, watching the stars stretch out endlessly ahead of us, two people from entirely different worlds who somehow, against every reasonable expectation either of us started with 16 days ago, found something neither of us was looking for, and neither of us is quite ready to let go of now that we have finally found it. Outside, the stars keep moving, steady and endless, the same way they always have, indifferent to debts forgiven or alliances formed or two people slowly learning how to see each other clearly for the very first time. But for the first time in longer than either of us can remember, neither the galaxy's most stunning alien woman nor the maintenance worker who told her so is in any particular hurry to look away.